Here's something most people never get told: some of the most perceptive human beings alive, people who can sense tension in a room before anyone speaks, who know a situation is unraveling days before it actually does, who read a person's real mood the moment they walk through a door, none of them trained for that. No course. No book. No mentor, they were built that way. Quietly. Involuntarily. Through years of having to be, and the cruelest part, nobody ever told them that's what was happening. Instead, they were called anxious. Oversensitive. Dramatic. Too intense. Too much. What nobody named was the intelligence underneath all of that, so if your brain has always felt like it operates on a different frequency, always scanning, always processing, always 2 moves ahead in a conversation, stay with me. Because what you're about to hear might be the first framework that actually fits your experience. Sign 1, you read people before they say a single word, not in a cold, calculated way. More involuntary than that, someone enters the space, and something in you immediately starts assembling a picture. A flicker of tension around the eyes. A laugh that lands a half-second late. Shoulders carrying weight they weren't carrying last Tuesday. You file all of it, automatically, without choosing to, and you're usually right. Right enough that it occasionally unsettles the people around you, and sometimes unsettles you too. Here's the neuroscience underneath that. Children raised in emotionally volatile environments, homes where the atmosphere could shift without warning, where love and fear lived very close together, do something remarkable. Their brains rewire. The threat detection system accelerates. The nervous system learns to catch signals earlier, because catching them early meant staying safe. Psychologists have a name for this: hypervigilance. It's a survival adaptation. The problem is, survival adaptations don't retire themselves when the danger passes. They travel with you. Into every room. Every new relationship. Every ordinary Tuesday that carries inexplicable weight. What you experience as reading people is that old system running, just in a world that no longer requires it for survival, and yet still makes use of it every single day. Sign 2, you feel the truth of a situation before logic catches up. You sensed a friendship cooling months before anything visible changed. You knew a relationship had already shifted before the conversation that confirmed it ever happened. And when you tried to explain how you knew, you couldn't. There was no evidence you could point to. It simply settled in your body as fact, and then, eventually, became fact. This isn't mysticism. It's neuroscience. Intense emotional experiences, especially early ones, are stored differently from ordinary memories. Rather than being filed as coherent narrative in the conscious brain, they're encoded in the body itself. In the nervous system. In sensation and reflex, and a kind of knowing that exists below language, which means your body holds awareness your verbal mind hasn't processed yet. You register the answer before you can construct the argument for it. What looks like a hunch is actually your nervous system reading a pattern it has seen before, just faster than conscious thought can follow. Sign 3, you're more comfortable with complexity than most people will ever be. Simple answers frustrate you, not because you're contrarian, but because you've lived enough to know they're usually incomplete. You've accepted that people are contradictions. That someone can genuinely love you and still leave damage behind. That 2 things which seem impossible to hold simultaneously can both be completely true. Most people spend enormous energy pushing that kind of ambiguity away. You stop doing that somewhere along the way, not out of apathy, but because reality kept insisting. Environments that don't sort cleanly, where the person who was supposed to protect you was also the source of fear, where the rules kept changing without explanation, produce a particular kind of cognitive development. The mind that cannot rely on simple frameworks builds more sophisticated ones. It learns to hold contradiction without collapsing. To operate in uncertainty without needing immediate resolution. That's not emotional damage dressed up nicely. That is a measurably more complex relationship with reality than most people ever develop. Sign 4, other people's pain lands in your body, not just your mind. This isn't the polite empathy of saying the right thing in the right moment. It's more physical than that. Someone across a room is struggling, and you feel something shift in your chest before they've said a word. A story on a screen, a stranger's story, produces a response in you that feels disproportionate to the distance. You sometimes genuinely cannot locate the boundary between what you're feeling and what you've absorbed from someone nearby. Psychology describes this as emotional contagion, the nervous system unconsciously mirroring the emotional states it detects in others. Everyone experiences it to some degree. But in people whose early environments demanded constant emotional attunement, the sensitivity calibrates to a much higher setting. The same system that makes you extraordinary at reading people also means you don't just read them, you absorb what you read, and this is where honesty matters. Because a video that names only the gifts and says nothing of the cost would be doing you a disservice. That same pattern recognition occasionally misfires. It reads threat in situations that are actually safe. It interprets a harmless silence as the beginning of something wrong. The empathy tips into over-responsibility, and you find yourself carrying weight that was never meant to be yours. The constant scanning is genuinely exhausting in a way that's difficult to explain to people who don't experience it. This isn't weakness. But it is real, and it deserves to be named alongside everything else. Sign 5. You self-sabotage exactly when things start going well. This one is uncomfortable to say plainly, but it needs to be said. You work towards something, a relationship that actually feels right. An opportunity that aligns with who you're becoming, a version of your life that finally looks the way you wanted it to. And then, when you're close enough to actually have it, something happens. You manufacture distance. You escalate a conflict that had no reason to escalate. You convince yourself it was always going to fall apart anyway, so you leave, before the falling apart can happen to you. This is not self-destruction for its own sake. It's your nervous system doing what it learned to do. When the early environment was unstable, safety itself becomes an unfamiliar signal. Calm becomes suspicious, because in your experience, calm was what came right before everything broke. So when genuine stability finally arrives, your system reads it as the precursor to danger, not the absence of it. Understanding this reframes everything. The behavior isn't a flaw in your character. It's a learned response, shaped by a specific past, running automatically in a present that no longer matches those conditions. That distinction matters. Because flaws feel fixed. Learned responses can be unlearned, slowly, with patience, and with the right kind of repeated experience. Sign 6. You can't stop asking why, not philosophically, as a hobby. Compulsively. Constantly. Against your own will sometimes. Why did they say it with that particular tone? Why does this dynamic feel like something I've lived before? Why is my reaction to this moment so much larger than the moment seems to deserve? What is this reaction actually protecting? You narrate your interior experience with the same rigor most people reserve for external problems. You analyze your own patterns the way an engineer analyzes a system. Research on what psychologists term post-traumatic growth documents this as a genuine, measurable outcome of early adversity, a deepened capacity for meaning-making, a more elaborate and searching inner life, a mind that learned to interrogate rather than simply experience. The mind that was forced to make sense of something that should never have required making sense of becomes very skilled at the searching. It doesn't always find what it's looking for. But the searching itself changes the architecture of how you think. Sign 7. You understand yourself clearly, and it doesn't always stop you. You know your patterns. You can map them, trace their origins, articulate them with genuine precision. You could walk someone through exactly how and why you respond the way you do, and then, sometimes, you watch yourself do it anyway. That gap, between knowing and actually changing, is one of the most quietly painful aspects of this kind of intelligence. Because knowledge feels like it should be enough. And it isn't. Insight is a beginning. A real one. But the nervous system doesn't update through understanding alone. It updates through new experience, lived, felt, repeated in a body that gradually, slowly, learns that the old conditions no longer apply. That's not a reason to abandon the self-awareness. It's a reason to pair it with something more, with patience, with practice, with the willingness to stay in the discomfort of something good long enough for your system to stop treating it as a threat. You have been doing something genuinely difficult for a very long time. With a kind of intelligence most people never develop, and most others never fully recognized in you. Maybe this is where that starts to change. If parts of this felt like they were describing something you've never had words for, check the description and pinned comment. There's a practical resource there designed specifically for the patterns we talked about today: overthinking, emotional regulation, building steadier ground. Simple, structured, and actually usable. I think a lot of you will find it worth your time.